Okay, hello everyone. Happy snow day. I hope you're all having a nice extra day off. I'm going to quickly go through our Reformation and Scientific Revolution lecture since we will not have time to fit this in on a normal day anymore. Also, I apologize for my voice. I've had a cold the last week and seems to be lingering. Okay, you can follow along with these notes. You're going to want those Western Europe Expands notes as the same ones that we started last time, where we went through the Renaissance and filled out all of the art. Okay, now would be a good time to pause this recording and go through our little pie wheel chart here and make sure that you give yourself a little bit of a review before moving on. Okay, scientific revolution. Three important people to know during the scientific revolution. Newton would be the first one, mostly to know about Newton. He's the guy that realized there's such a thing as gravity, figured out laws of motion. Galileo was a physicist, an astronomer. He comes up with basically the scientific method that we use today, where you make a hypothesis, you test things out, etc. And then there's Copernicus. We talked about him a little bit last time. He's the guy who comes up with the heliocentric theory, which says that the sun is the center of the universe and not the earth. This went against the teachings of the Catholic Church, who believed that the earth was the center of the universe because, we're super cool. Why wouldn't we be the center of the universe? All right, Protestant Reformation. Easiest way to remember what the Protestant Reformation is, one, starts with protest. Okay, so people are protesting something they dislike. Reformation, reform, right? So that means they're going to change something. So when we talk about Protestant Reformation, hopefully you can realize that we're talking about religion. So there's going to be protest and then change from that. A couple important things on people that kind of get the ball rolling with the Protestant Reformation. The first is John Wycliffe. And he is going to say that priests are basically unnecessary for salvation. When I say salvation, I mean, getting into heaven, the afterlife. He says we don't need priests. You can have your own connection with God. He's vilified for translating the Bible into English vernacular. The church does not like that, right? They want the Bible to remain in Latin because they're some of the only people that can read that, and therefore they maintain control. If we write it in English vernacular and everybody can read it, well, then everybody can make up their own mind about the Bible. Not good for the Catholic Church. And then there's Jan Hus. His followers are called the Hussites. Basically, they're declared heretics for very similar beliefs as Wycliffe. And most of them are burned at the stake. So that's nice. And then we've got the Black Death or the plague. We've talked about this a lot before, right? But I want you to kind of put it in context as to what that means for the church and why they might lose some authority. Now remember, the church is supposed to be all-powerful. They're supposed to be the ones that have the connection to God. So if now millions of people are dying across Europe, there's going to be a lot of questions that people will have for the church. Like, why didn't you stop this? Why didn't you prevent this from happening? So they start to lose some of their authority. So kind of all these things start to create this perfect storm of people questioning the Catholic Church. Then we get this guy, Martin Luther. No relation to Martin Luther King Jr. Do not confuse them. All right, so Martin Luther. He is a German monk. He says that the church practices, the Catholic Church, are violating biblical teachings. There are a few things that he particularly doesn't like. One of them is the sale of indulgences. So the way the sale of indulgences would work is that you would gain absolution from punishments of sin by purchasing an indulgence. So theoretically, you could commit a sin and then go to the church and give them money. In return, you would get this lovely piece of paper called an indulgence. It would be signed by the priest, and it would say, you are absolved or given freedom from all of your sins, and now you'll get to go to heaven. So basically buying your way into heaven. Martin Luther says, one, that's just not That's not doable. Like, that's not how it works. And two, that's just, taking advantage of people. It's corruption. He also is against simony, which is the sale of church offices. So kind of just a lot of corruption, money changing hands that he doesn't like with the church. He's got a whole list of things that he doesn't like, 95 things, in fact, and they're called the 95 Theses. According to legend, he lists out these 95 theses, or these things that he dislikes or wants to change about the Catholic Church. Note, if you actually read through the 95 theses, it's really not 95. He repeats himself a lot on there. But I guess 95 sounded good. According to legend, he nails the 95 theses to the church door in defiance, but most likely he probably just nailed up a note calling for a meeting to discuss them. Regardless, he is famous for his 95 theses. Word starts to spread about them. Pope Leo X, who is our pope at the time, excommunicated Luther in 1521. Remember, to excommunicate means that he is kicked out of the Catholic Church. Luther does have people that side with him, quite a few of them, and he never intended to start his own church, but he and his followers are now branded as Lutherans, and essentially that's what happens. He starts his own branch of Christianity. So Lutherans are a part of a larger group of protesters who are called the Protestants. Again, there's that word protest in Protestants, right? So Lutheranism is a form of Protestantism, which is a form of Christianity.
The thought bubble. Luther studied law, and like most law students, he hated it. Then one day, a sudden storm blew up, lightning struck him to the ground, and in a panic, he cried, "Help me, Saint Anne, I'll become a monk." He survived, and in the next 2 weeks, he withdrew from university, entered an Augustinian monastery, took his vows, and sent a message to inform his family, who I'm sure were delighted to have spent all that money on education because monking is so lucrative. In 1505, Luther was sent to Rome on a diplomatic mission, and he ignored all the awesome art and focused instead on Rome's corruption, with prostitutes openly soliciting on the filthy streets, priests who made light of their duties hurrying through Mass so fast that it seemed to mean nothing, and openly deriding church doctrine. Luther was obsessed with his own sinfulness, and he kept confessing incessantly, and finally his confessor and teachers sent him to the University of Wittenberg because, they were a little bit annoyed with him, and they figured he'd be good at teaching scripture. These days, of course, incessant confessors are put on the Real Housewives of New Jersey, but back then you sent them to the University of Wittenberg. Anyway, Luther finally found his answer in St. Paul's epistles, specifically in one line that said, "The just shall live by faith." In other words, salvation comes through faith, not good works, not through prayer or fasting or vigils or pilgrimages or relics or giving to the poor or the sacraments or any action that a person can take. We can't ever be good enough through our actions to merit salvation. We can only have faith. In Latin, sola fide, only faith. Thanks.
Okay, so the key thing to remembering about Lutheranism is what they were saying at the end of this video, is that the only way, according to Lutherans, that you can achieve salvation or go to heaven in the afterlife is through faith and faith alone. So it doesn't matter if you do good works during your life. It doesn't matter if you buy indulgences, right? None of those things matter. All that matters in the end is your faith. All right. I got one more video for you, mostly for fun. Enjoy this one.
If you having church problems, then don't blame God, son. I got 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. Listen up, all my people, it's a storm for the telling about the sin and injustice and corruption I've been smelling. I met that homie Ketzel, then I started rebelling once I seen the fat indulgences that he been selling. Now the Catholics of the world straight up disgracing me just because I wear my finger at the papacy. My people got riled up over this Reformation. That's when Leo threatened me with excommunication. I warn y'all that Rome best agree to the terms. If not, then you can eat my diet of worms. You think you gone and done something spectacular? I wrote the whole Bible in the vernacular. A heretic? What? Someone throw me a bone. You forgot salvation comes through faith alone. I'm on a mission for God. You think I do this for fun? I got 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. Save me. 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. If you having church problems, then don't blame God, son. I got 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. 1517 when it first went down. Then the real test is when it started spreading around. 60 days to recant what I said. Father, please, you've had what? Going on 15 centuries? Oh, snap, he's messing with the Holy Communion. But I ain't never dissed your precious hypostatic union. Well, thank you, Zwingli. Yeah, way to disregard that whole I'm God thing. Getting all up in my rosary, you little punk. Your mama should have told you not to mess with no monk. What you bumping me for? Suddenly you sore? Keep that up, you'll have yourself another peasant's war. You blame Tom and Coke for the smack me talk. You ain't never even taught the proper Christian doctrine. With my hat, my Bible, and my sexy little nun, I got 95 pieces, but the Pope ain't one. Save me. 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. If you having church problems, then don't blame God, son. I got 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. When I roll a 95, paid it straight up for sale. Now they only care whether or not I made them or made them. They got psychoanalytic. Now everyone's a critic and getting on my cases because I'm anti-Semitic. I come back from obscurity to teach y'all a lesson. Cause someone here still ain't read the Augsburg Confession. I say Catholicism brings a life of excess, and we all remember when we're down with Philip the Hess. You forgot about me and my religious demonstration. Like you can just go create your own denomination. We don't like this part, so we'll just add a little twist. Now we Anglican, Amish, and even Calvinist. I gave you the power, you got it, abused it. I gave you God's truth, you just confused it. Don't you never underestimate the shit that I done. I got 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. Save me. 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. If you having church problems, then don't blame God, son. I got 95 theses, but the Pope ain't one. Shout out to Johann Gutenberg. I see you, baby.
Alrighty. Hope you enjoyed that one. Okay, so Lutherans aren't the only Protestant religion to come out of this time. Another big one is going to be Calvinism. This is started by a French theologian named John Calvin. He broke with the Catholic Church in about 1530, starts this religious community in Geneva, Switzerland. Very similar to Lutheranism with a little bit of a change. So one of their core beliefs has to do with predestination. So they believed that the elect, or these like very important people who were elected or predestined to go to heaven, ran their religious community. So they felt that God pre-selected people that were going to be given salvation. They lived their lives very plainly, very simple buildings, simple churches. If you've ever heard of the Huguenots in France, those are the Calvinist followers in France. The Reformed Church of Scotland, led by John Knox, and the Puritans in England and Boston are also an offshoot of this. They encouraged hard work, so we often kind of get this idea of Protestant work ethic from the Calvinists. So this gives you kind of a nice graphic of how Christianity has split up so far. Right, we previously had talked about just like the early Christian church. So that's just, the beginning of Christianity, and it's all just one big branch. Then it splits into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholicism. Remember, Eastern Orthodox was prominent in places like Russia. Roman Catholicism dominates Western Europe for a very long time. But then we have a break in the 16th century with the Protestant Reformation, and that creates Protestantism. Under Protestantism, you have religions like Lutheranism, Anglicanism, and Calvinism. And then if you look at some of those subcategories, Episcopalian, Baptist, Methodist, etc., right? So a lot of those religions are all Protestant, but remember, Protestant is still a part of the Christian religion. So sometimes it gets a little confusing because there's so many offshoots. Okay, so what's going to happen next? Well, lots of wars, right? We've got two sides, our Protestants and our Catholics, that are not getting along. So, as we always see in world history, that's going to lead to some wars. Okay. Actually, so before I get into the wars, let's talk about the Counter-Reformation. Counter-Reformation is sometimes called the Catholic Reformation, and essentially it's the Catholic Church trying to do a little bit of a 180 and turn things back in their favor. So they come up with this three-pronged strategy that consists of the Inquisition, the Jesuits, and the Council of Trent. The Inquisition is established in the late 12th century, so this isn't anything new. But their job as a group of people is to root out and punish non-believers. Sometimes they even use torture to do that. So it's definitely a scare tactic to try to convince people to remain part of the Catholic Church. Then in 1540, Ignatius of Loyola is going to found a religious order called the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits. So they're going to take on missionary activity in Europe and beyond. So they're going to go out there into the world and, again, try to convince people to either continue with Catholicism or convert to it. And then there's the Council of Trent. So this happens between 1545 and 1563. And it's essentially a really big meeting of all of the most important church leaders. And they get together and try to correct some of the church's worst abuses and concentrated on reaffirming things like the rituals of marriage and other sacraments while improving education of the priests. So they're going to try to really confront some of those issues that people seem to be upset about. They are very successful in what they do. Okay, this three-pronged strategy works very well for them. It's also worth noting during this time period, the Spanish Armada. So very quickly, Charles V had abdicated as the Holy Roman Emperor in 1555 because he could not stop the spread of Lutheranism and left Spain to his son Philip II and the Holy Roman Empire to his brother Ferdinand. Philip takes up the Catholic crusade to England, very empowered by Catholicism, and he thinks that he is going to be able to overtake England, who has become Protestant at this point, but he is famously beaten by some really bad weather, some bad luck, and the English Navy. And that's the Spanish Armada, is his fleet of ships. When England defeats the Spanish Armada, this really begins England's rise to naval dominance, which we will see very characteristic of England throughout the next few centuries. Okay, so back to those wars I was talking about. So we've got wars of religion, right? A couple important things to know. So between 1546 and 47, a war goes on between Charles V and the German Lutherans. So the war itself doesn't matter so much as what resulted in the end, which is the Peace of Augsburg. So the Peace of Augsburg allowed each German state to choose whether its ruler and its subjects would be Catholic or Lutheran. If you lived in an area and you rejected or did not agree with that ruler's choice, you were allowed to then move to a different German state where your religion was practiced. So this is kind of a new thing, and shows a little bit more religious tolerance. Then we have the 30 Years' War, last 30 years, just like its name implies. So this goes from 1618 to 1648, and this is the final Great War between Catholics and Protestants. It leads to economic disaster for most of the continent. Troops were allowed to loot as part of their compensation, so this leads to a whole lot of famine, disease, starvation, and just chaos and destruction. The peace ends at it ends at the Peace of Westphalia. This allowed each area of the Holy Roman Empire to choose whether they wanted to be Roman Catholic, Lutheran, or Calvinist. In the end, France, Spain, and Italy are all going to choose to be Catholic. Most of Northern Europe is going to be either Lutheran or Calvinist. And then England is going to become Protestant with a state church. The religious map is going to remain pretty stable after this point, which you can see here. All right, and that wraps up our notes for today. So if you missed anything, feel free to go back. Make sure that you're filling out your note guide, and we will pick things up in class next time.